It's my pleasure to introduce Katie Kirchhoff.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Can you all hear me in the back? Is this volume good? Okay, that's great. Can I have somebody hit the lights, please? Perfect. Does that look all right to everybody? Good deal. Nice. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank everyone for coming out today. I pulled into the lot at 1:07 and the front part was totally full, and I thought, yes, this is wonderful. I'm especially grateful to get to be here because, like a lot of folks, after 2020, I increasingly appreciate chances to get together with real people in person. So thanks for making the effort to come out and have a conversation today. Over the next 40 minutes or so, what is my timing like, by the way, Dan? When are we wrapping up here? At 3? Okay, great. So over the next hour and change, we're going to have an opportunity to do a preview of the exhibition Varied and Alive. I'm sorry, I keep fooling with this. It's right behind my ear. Which is an exhibition that I'm co-curating with our senior curator at Shelburne Museum, Corey Rogers. Hang on, I'm going to get this right. Okay. So it is a multimedia 2-year exhibition that's going to be in the Pizzagalli Center for Art and Education on the lower level. And we have been installing it for the last month or so. So it's a really broad range of different kinds of objects from the collection. And we're going to take a look at some of those today. But before I get going, I do have a couple questions. The first one is, can I get a show of hands? Who's been to the museum? Oh, you guys, this is really sweet. So I was talking with a gentleman earlier who worked there before I arrived in 2016. And so it occurs to me that some of this may be old hat for many of you, but bear with me. We learn and relearn as we move through the world. But yeah, I wanted to sort of give everyone a broad intro to this exhibition, and then open the floor for conversation. Just also before we get started, is there anyone who has like a favorite object at the museum? What's your favorite object? Oh, the Ticonderoga is pretty hot stuff, isn't it? I mean, literally and figuratively, it would have been hot stuff, but...
I had an uncle that rode on it.
Really?
He's still alive.
Oh, we had a party on it last year, and you could dress up in your favorite nautical gear, and some people came in some of the early life preservers that had been on the Ticonderoga. It was very impressive. So anyway, no, the tie is terrific. For those of you who haven't been there, the museum is 45 acres. We have 39 buildings and structures, including the steamboat, a lighthouse, all kinds of things. My head is not good for headbands. I don't know if this is, it seems silly. Anyway, it's kind of a weird shape. So we have all of these buildings and structures, and in fact, hang on. We're going to do this. This is a little better. So we have all these buildings and structures, and we are actually in the process of building a new building right now. It's going to be the Perry Center for Native American Art. And so that has been sort of at the top of everyone's research list recently. But this show that I'm going to talk with you all about today is drawn from our permanent collection of more than 100,000 items. So still sounding okay to everybody? It's all right? Good deal. All right, so let's get going. This is a photograph actually that was taken by Ken Burris of Dutton House Attic in 1992. And I really love this picture because while it is certainly a cleaned up image, most attics don't look like this, right? It does give you an idea of the kind of unusual range of items that we have at the museum. So when Electra Havemeyer Webb incorporated Shelburne Museum in 1947, does anybody know how it started? I know at least one person here knows how it started, but anybody? So it started when the Webb family decided that they were going to get rid of their collection of horse-drawn vehicles. So sleighs, carriages, those kinds of things. And Electra, the social circles that she ran in included people like Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, who was starting Colonial Williamsburg, and a number of other folks who were really interested in a time that now we refer to as the colonial revival. So thinking about the colonial period in 19th century America, there were a lot of antiques that were sort of being repurposed for contemporary living. So think about like butter churns turned into lamps, that kind of thing. And so Electra was really part of this larger social conversation, social and cultural conversation that was going on. And when the Webb family decided they were going to divest themselves of their carriages, she said, "Don't do that. I'll take them. I'll make a museum." So she started buying up land in Shelburne along Route 7, the 45 acres now that the museum occupies. She employed a number of folks from the town. There was one original building on the site, which is now, it's known as the Variety Unit, and it's the sort of rabbit warren of buildings that have our doll collection and a lot of our ceramics and those kinds of things on the north end of campus. But, you know, she moved buildings from all over New England, like a lot of her peers were doing, and she brought them to the campus, reconstructed them, and then housed her collections in each building. So if you come, you know, Dorset House is where we have our collection of duck decoys. There are other buildings like the Hatton Fragrance Textile Gallery that specialize in particular media. Stagecoach Inn is where we keep our folk art collections. And the folk art was really important to some of Electra's early collecting. She was one of the first people who was collecting folk art formally. So we're talking about things like shop figures, what she would have called items like cigar store Indians, those kinds of things. Folk art like weathervanes and whirligigs was becoming very popular with collectors, and those kinds of items, interestingly, had a lot of connections to modern art. And so she was interested in that too. And she worked with a lot of advisors, folks like Lillian Baker Carlisle, who helped her select items for the collection. So when this picture was taken in 1992 of one of the attics of one of the buildings, we really, but anyhow, this picture got our senior curator and me talking, and we thought, you know, it's been a while since we've done a highlights show from our permanent collection. So we have items like this. This is a big spectacle optometrist trade sign. You know, I started mentioning folk art and folk art collecting, and these were the kinds of items that would come up at auction or would come through dealers that were really popular with collectors in the early 20th century. This is, it's about 6 feet wide, so I don't have a banana for scale here, unfortunately, but it is a really, really large gilded sign. And one of the interesting things about trade signs, the way that they work, right, is you don't have to be literate to understand what is going on, right? If someone hangs this outside their place of business, you have a sense of what you might be able to find inside. And so this is one of those, this is actually one of my favorites because I think graphically it's really beautiful. But there's also this. So this terrific shop sign it was made during the 19th century for a farm supply store. And we don't have any information on where it was, like what state it was acquired. But it's really interesting, right? If you look at it, you have all these different kinds of tools that are sort of built. And then if you really wanted to, you know, right here, you could have like a sign with words on it that says that you're open or what you're selling or what you have in stock. I think about this often when I drive by the Tractor Supply during the spring and they have chicks for sale, right? Sometimes I do go in just to pet the chicks, but anyway. So we have items like this. This is one of my favorite trade signs. So this is a mortar and pestle apothecary sign. It's from the 19th century, and you'll notice that on the left side of the screen, you actually can see that there is a power plug. Are you guys getting feedback back there? It's really not. I'm not sure. Hang on. How's that? Oh, that's better. Maybe it was just me. I'm still hearing it. I'm sorry, guys. It was. Hang on for a hot second. I'm conscious that if you've got a device in your ear, it could be extra challenging. I'm just going to keep talking. Do you guys know what a werewolf's favorite salad green is? Anybody? How's that? Oh, I'm still hearing it just a little bit at the top end. It's arugula. Arugula. You're welcome. I know. I'll be here Tuesdays. All right, let's try that again. Oh, I think that sounds better. How's that? Yes? Okay, better. I was just hearing it and I was like, I can't think. I bet you guys, it's unpleasant to listen to. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so this apothecary trade sign, if you look at the left side of the image, you'll notice that there's a power cord coming out from it, right? So this whole thing lights up. The inside of it is illuminated, and all of these little sort of faceted gems that you see would glow with the different colors of light that would come out. So this would be hung outside of a shop, and you would know, walking up to it, what that was all about. It also, to me, looks like the most fun Christmas ornament ever. But we're gonna have this installed and hanging in the exhibition. And I'm really excited. Again, no banana for scale, but this is about this big. So it's really sizable, right? It's not like a tiny thing. So these kinds of items were really, often these trade signs played with issues of scale. And part of that was for visibility, right? If you were walking down the street or driving down the street in a car, you could spot something in the day or night and know where you were going for that. This fabulous chair, I do have a picture for scale for this. So we call this our Boston Rocker, and this is dated 1849. It's sort of tough to see from the back, but it's got the date right at the very top of it. And so this rocker was found in Morrisville, Vermont. We think it probably was used to advertise a local chair factory that was there. And we know that Electra purchased it in 1957. So the museum had been incorporated for about 10 years at that point. She had been collecting for many decades prior to this. But to give you an idea of how big it is, right? That's one you've got to kind of understand. So the picture that you're seeing up on the screen, that's a little better. There we go. So the picture you're seeing up on the screen is Electra on the left in a sort of regular size, standard sized rocking chair, and her friend Zazu Pitts on the right. Who knows the name Zazu Pitts? Anybody? Someone tell me, who's Zazu Pitts?
Well, I don't know, but I know I used to watch her on TV.
On TV, somebody else. She was an actress, right? So Zazu and Electra were friends. We actually have a fabulous dollhouse that's on display in Variety Unit that Zazu sort of decorated and put together, and it is extraordinary. I played with dollhouses as a kid, but the kinds of dollhouses that we have at the museum are beyond anything that I think I ever would have known about as a child. So items like this, Electra was drawn to items that played with scale, or that items that had a certain kind of humor that was embedded in them and embodied by them. Right, the giant fork is also excellent. Yeah, so the giant fork, yes. Yeah, did people not notice that until just now? So there's this giant fork that Zazu's holding. It reminds me a lot of Lily Tomlin when I was a kid. Lily Tomlin used to sit and eat pickles. But I love this picture, and it gives you a sense that I never met Electra, obviously, but I feel like she had a really good sense of humor, probably. So these items, we have much of our collection of trade signs is on display in Stagecoach Inn, which is a white building toward the north end of our campus. And those are our kind of semi-permanent installations, but for the purposes of Varied and Alive, we really wanted to pull some things out of storage that no one had seen for a while, and so this is one of those items. Does anybody have questions about this? I figure every now and then I'll open the floor, but, and if I say something that doesn't make sense, or if you have a question, raise your hand. This could be a conversation too. So this gentleman is our kilted Scotsman. We think that he was made around 1878, and he's been attributed to Thomas Brooks. So Thomas Brooks was a really well-known shop figure carver. These kinds of figures would have been fairly ubiquitous in big cities like Boston and New York and Baltimore. They often were put outside tobacco shops. That's where this one would have been. It's a little tough to see if you're in the back of the room, but in his hand, he holds this little circular object. Anybody have an idea what that might be? A snuff box, yes. So yeah, he's holding snuff, which of course is a tobacco, like a ground tobacco product. I've never had snuff. I think we might have moved on from that. But anyway, so he's holding that, and we have quite a collection of these shop figures. Really, one that is very deep, and one that we need to be thoughtful about when we exhibit, because quite frankly, they play on stereotypes of all kinds of folks who at one point or another might have been seen as an other, right? Not like us, but different because. And so one of the really fun things about our collection is that we have had an opportunity to sort of go through and pull some of these items out and really think hard about what their contexts were when they were first made and consumed and used. I saw a question in the back.
Did Electra shop nationally, New England, or internationally?
So the question is, did Electra shop nationally, or just in New England, or internationally? So she did most of her shopping regionally, but certainly there were items that were coming from across the country, and we know of a number of items that she was importing or having imported from the UK. There were sort of scattered items too. So one of the things about our collection is that we have a really lovely collection of Impressionist paintings, which are not American. But I'm going to step away from here and see if that helps. Can you all still hear me in the back? Yes, okay. So we have this great collection of Impressionist paintings that came to us because Electra's mother, Louisine Havemeyer, was really good friends with this woman you may have heard of named Mary Cassatt. Right? Mary Cassatt, yes. So Mary Cassatt, who's from Pennsylvania, she goes away to train in Paris as a painter at a time when there were a number of American expats who were going to Paris to do this. If you were wealthy, you could do this. You sort of had the time and social capital to do that. So Mary and Louisine met, and Mary provided entree for Louisine to meet a number of painters like Edgar Degas and Claude Monet. And in fact, Mary introduced Louisine to an important dealer who permitted Louisine to purchase many of these paintings and bring them back to the United States. Something you may not know is that Shelburne actually is home to the first Monet to come to America. Right, that's pretty cool. Sometimes I walk into that building and I think, I wonder how many people don't have any idea. It's a painting of a drawbridge in Amsterdam. It's in the Electra Havemeyer Webb Memorial Building in the living room, in the white living room. And, you know, I confess to you all, Impressionism is not my favorite thing on the planet, but I love that it gets so many people in the door and it gets so many people looking. So Louisine was quite the collector. She and her husband, Henry Osborne Havemeyer, collected French 19th century paintings as well as Dutch Golden Age portraits. And much of the Havemeyer collection ended up going to the Met Museum and actually forming the core of their collection of French Impressionist paintings. There are a number of other paintings by people like Mary Cassatt that landed at the Met because of Louisine's influence with the American wing and those kinds of collecting circles. So Shelburne really has these sort of interesting threads, but your question about where Electra was purchasing, she was doing some shopping on her own, but she also had dealers in New York and Boston and across New England who would contact her when interesting items came up for sale. And so there were definitely people who were sort of on the ground doing the footwork for her and then sending her things on spec. One person who actually was very involved with her folk art collecting was a dealer named Edith Halpert. Has anyone heard of her? No? So Edith is a fascinating story. She almost single-handedly sort of redeveloped the market for American painting in the 1920s and 1930s. And in 1929, what happens in 1929? Anybody? Right, I know. So in 1929, when the economy takes a hit, collectors who had previously purchased items from Edith were like, I don't have as much money. I can't buy paintings right now. And so what Edith did was she started driving around in her car, going to old farms in New England and offering to buy people's weather vanes off of their houses, their whirligigs out of their yards, all kinds of their garden sculpture. She'd take it back to New York to her gallery on 51st Street, and she would sort of gussy everything up and sell them for lower price points that were a little more accessible. And this is the point in time when people like Abby Rockefeller are collecting for Colonial Williamsburg, and these collections of folk art are really growing. So this Scotsman would have been sort of part of that collecting moment in history. Oh, so he is about, with the base, he's about 7 feet tall. So he's sizable, right? He would have stood slightly above the crowd if you were walking down a crowded street, right? And especially with this big sort of hat that he's wearing, like this would have been familiar to people who were walking down streets in cities, but also, indicated what was happening in that shop. It's a good question. So this looks like it could be big, but this is actually very small. And something, when you visit the museum, you will notice is that, again, these issues of size get played with. So this Pratt's Express wagon was a model, so it was made for his child, his son, Alonzo Jr., and it was modeled off of a fully functional, full-sized wagon. But we have this in the exhibition as a kind of nod to the roots of the museum existing with Electra and the Webb family collection of horse-drawn vehicles. If you come to see us, you know that in several buildings we have these big collections of historic vehicles. We have one of the best collections in the country of these, in fact. And they're really, really interesting when you sort of get down to how folks were moving across the landscape at different times. We're going to talk a little bit about train technology later today and how important trains were for life here in Vermont as well as across the country. But these kinds of smaller items, we have quite a toy collection at the museum too, and so they sort of cross all of these thematic boundaries. So this picture, in the show, one of the items that we're most excited about is the recently restored, let's see, there you go, is the recently restored model of the steamship Boston. So we were talking about the Ticonderoga earlier, but the Boston is, as you can see, because we have Electra for scale, really pretty extraordinary. It is a large model of a steamship. It is not a working model, so it doesn't sort of move on its own, but it does have all of these figures all over it that when you see them in person, they are really expressive and sort of funny. The other thing is, if you look into the windows when you come to visit us, you'll notice that the interiors of this steamship are fully outfitted. At one time, it had lights that would turn on. The wiring no longer functions. But it's one of those things, again, that really sort of speaks to a number of the different kinds of things in Electra's collection and a lot of different interests. So we've got the Boston. We also have all kinds of paintings. So this picture of the Metamora was painted by James Bard. So James and his brother John Bard. Has anyone heard of the Bard brothers? You've heard of the Bard. Of course you've heard of it. You know all these things. So, but I appreciate you raising your hand. I know you're not asleep. So the Bard brothers together painted thousands of pictures of historic boats. So these weren't painted for people's houses generally. They would be commissioned by steamship companies, and the portraits of their boats would then be hung in their offices as sort of models of industrial success and might and new technological innovations. We all live near enough to Lake Champlain, and then further north to the St. Lawrence Seaway. All of these kinds of steam-powered vehicles were really, really important, not just as pleasure cruisers, which the Metamora was, but as vehicles for trade, right? And prior to the railroad, these are especially important because how are you going to get things, over rocky roads and all those kinds of things? So at one point, Electra owned 7 paintings by the Bard brothers. And so they come out every now and then in exhibitions. But one of the really wonderful things about them when you see them in person is that they're very detailed. It's tough to see in here, but there's a whole inscription along the bottom of this. It says the steamboat Metamora, New York to Albany, the steamboat passenger line, and it says that John Tatman is the commander, and then there's a little date and a signature by the maker. But the brothers were raised in New York City. They lived in South Manhattan, sort of near the seaport, where they would get lots of business. And these kinds of pictures are just, they're sort of magical in real life, I think. There are all kinds of other items in the show. We've been talking a little bit about weather vanes. So we've got this fabulous schooner and also this locomotive. The locomotive is especially interesting to me in that it is, when you see it in person, it is a piece of flat metal, right? Flat cut metal for the train. But this sort of rising sun has a functional purpose. Does anybody know what it would have been? Think about barns or tall buildings. What do we have on top of tall buildings?
Lightning rod.
Yes. Who said lightning rod? Good job. So this would work as a lightning rod. And when you actually look at this locomotive weather vane, you'll notice that the sort of sun that has these spikes that would function as a lightning rod is in this really sort of wonderful round contrast to the flat locomotive below. They're terrific items in person. The other thing about the schooner that you see there is that it stands out quite a bit from the wall. We've been having a lot of conversations about how to properly mount these for the last several weeks as we've installed the show. And I think they look really good in person. So we have a whole section that we have titled Life on the Go. So the exhibition is called Varied and Alive, and I probably should have started with this, but one of the reasons that we've titled the exhibition that is that when Electra incorporated the museum in 1947, she wanted her museum project to be an educational project, varied and alive. That was our mission statement. It remains our mission statement. We've sort of expanded it in various ways. But that sense of curiosity and the idea that we would be able to be sort of nimble as an organization as the world changed and progressed, I think has been, as a curator, it's really helpful because we can bring on items all the time that help us to kind of continue to tell new kinds of stories. So this train actually was acquired in 2024. It's a toy that is large enough for a small child to ride on, and it was made by a toy maker in North Thetford, Vermont, named Frank Tilton. Frank, he had been a paint salesman in Ohio, and he had a heart attack selling paint, and his doctors were like, Frank, you got to take it easy. And so he moved to Vermont, where his grandchildren were, and he started making these toys, and they were really tough toys. So they articulate, the wheels move, all those kinds of things. So he started making them for his own grandchildren. They became so popular that Frank ended up operating a mail order toy business. So he made all of these fabulous wooden toys. He even had like magazines that were published, like coloring books that came out with the toys. And the real irony of it is that the toy company became so popular that his doctors here in Vermont were eventually like, Frank, you got to stop it with the toy company. And so, it's interesting. If you can't see it from the back, on the sides of these train cars, it says Grandpa's Vermont Railroad. So it's really sweet. And in person, you can tell that these toys have been used and played with. And that's something else that sort of characterizes our museum and makes us a little different from a lot of places. We exhibit some items that clearly have been used, that were everyday kinds of things. And that stands in contrast to, like a fine arts museum that just does that. So we can sort of look at a range of things that all involve us getting creative with our time. We have all kinds of train-related paraphernalia at the museum. So what you're seeing here, and actually, you know what I'm going to do? Oh, nope. Hang on. Let's see. There. I just want you guys to be able to see the pictures, So this is a loving cup. Has anyone heard that term before? Yeah. So it was created by Tiffany and Company to honor Cornelius Vanderbilt Webb, the Commodore as he was known, because he worked with the Wagner Palace Company, the Wagner Palace Car Company. So if you've been to the museum, we have some of the sort of very nice train cars that if you were a Rockefeller or a Vanderbilt, you might have traveled around the country in. And this sort of memorial cup, it was made for the Commodore when he retired. And you see all kinds of really wonderful details all around it. So that's a portrait of the Commodore. And, here's a picture of where it was. Does anyone recognize this interior? No. So has anyone here been to the Inn at Shelburne Farms? So if you've been to the Inn at Shelburne Farms, on the first floor, this sort of is looking back toward what would be the formal dining room now. And there's the bar is sort of to the side. But you can see for scale this sort of memorial cup on this table in the foreground. Now it has like a little stand that's underneath it. We don't have the stand as far as we know. But you do get a sense of its scale, right? And its presence in this sort of Gilded Age interior. So it's rather fancy. And I think you might agree that the likeness is pretty good. Right? Isn't that's kind of extraordinary. I think about how tough it is to paint portraits and sort of get that likeness right. And whoever was the silversmith on this really had a deft hand. So there are other kinds of really fantastic views on this. So it's a three-sided cup. Here you see the interior of one of the fancy palace cars. So you can see a sort of table and these wonderful chairs. And all of the sort of bright work and lighting that would have illuminated the interior of this car.
The lettering
All,
he's the president or something?
Yep. It says upon his farewell from the president, December 31st, 1899. So yeah, this as an object, this is really a tour de force of silversmithing. So the exterior of it is all sterling, and the interior, you can just barely see it from here, has a gold wash. And so it really is this sort of over-the-top retirement gift, right? And here I've got a little detail of the train around the bottom. So the train that you see here, this was actually the local train that would cart guests around Nahasane. Does anyone know what that was? So that was the Vanderbilt's Adirondack estate. It does not exist anymore. But when you are so involved with the railroad business, you get your very own private railway at your Adirondack estate. And so this train that you see, you can see this is Wagner on the side here. It's dated 1899. And it really, the detail is it's just bananas. So we are displaying this on a stand so you can sort of walk all the way around it. There are other items in here. We have a whole section on interior lives. And maybe the things I'm most excited about are in that section. So when I was talking with Dan earlier, he said you work with the textiles, right? And that's one area of my interest. So we have an incredible collection at Shelburne Museum of an item called a bed rug. Has anyone heard of bed rugs? So we have 8 of them. For context and comparison, the Met has 2. And these were items, so they were really heavy, sort of like heavy coverlets for the very top of your bed. They were manufactured at home in sort of middle to upper middle class homes from about the 1720s to about the end of the 1830s. Not a lot of them have survived because they were usually made from homespun wool. And wool, if you keep wool sweaters in your closet, what happens to them? Sometimes they get eaten by moths. And it's because of the sort of protein content, right, of the fibers. They're really yummy to all kinds of animals. And so to have items that survive from the 18th or the early 19th century that are made of this, it takes a lot of care. So what we're looking at right now is Mary Comstock's bed rug. And Dan mentioned that I do some webinars. We actually have a webinar coming up next week where we're going to be doing a close looking at this bed rug with one of our textile conservators. So I'm really excited about that. In the 10 years that I've been at the museum, I have been wanting to get these out on display. But they're challenging items. They're really big and they're really heavy. I've never laid underneath one, but simply lifting them requires a couple people. So these items we're putting out on a big slanted board. During the first year of our 2-year exhibition, we'll have 2 of these. So Mary Comstock's rug and a second one. This was actually found in a building on the property that is now Shelburne Farms. So Mary was from coastal Connecticut. We know that she moved to Shelburne after she was married, and she made this in 1810 when she was 66 years old. So it would have been sort of old-fashioned at the time. This was sort of toward the end of when folks were making this. But design-wise, it's probably pulling from imported Indian textiles, bed covers that we sometimes refer to as palampores that would feature like a tree of life motif. That's sort of, you've got this big urn, right, with this big floral motif sort of coming out of it, maybe with a thistle in the middle. So this is, when you see it in person, there are lots of different textures. You may also notice that there is this sort of plaid design underneath it. When Mary completed the bed rug in 1810, you wouldn't have seen that plaid at all. So it's a hand-woven diamond twill plaid. We think it was probably made at home in 2 lengths. So when you look at the back of the bed rug, you notice there's a seam sort of running down the back right here. So 2 lengths that are about as wide as your arms, which makes sense if you've got a home loom, right, where you're moving a shuttle across and sort of making this. Another really interesting thing about this bed rug is that because of those lines, Mary was able to very evenly sew in her name across the top, right? It's almost like it's right out of a penmanship book. So I really, this is like one of the 5 items in the collection that I love the most. So it's been a real pleasure to be able to pull it out, and I'm so excited that guests are going to be able to see it in our galleries. The second bed rug that's going to go up this year is this one. So this was done in 1807 in Connecticut. And it's dated at the top. But again, you've got this sort of urn with these flowers around it. It's much more decorative all over. It's also heavier and a little larger than Mary's rug. And then the final one that we'll have up in year 2 is this one. I love this bed rug. So this was made in 1819. It would have been late for it, but doesn't it look like it's straight out of the 1960s? Like, I feel like this could be like a Mary Mako design. With these really wonderful with the sawtooth edge and these big, robust flowers. It really is, it's such a magical object. So you don't really get a sense of it when you look at it in pictures, but we're going to be able to have it out in the galleries so people can get right up close to it. So these are really fun kinds of items. You might be able to tell I really love our textile collection as I talk about this. Some of you know we have a really strong quilt collection. So this quilt is a crib quilt. And what you're seeing is on the right is an overall, on the left is a detail. So there was a question earlier about how Electra was finding her items. So this was made by a woman named Florence Peto. Has anyone ever heard of Florence Peto? So Florence was probably the earliest historian to write about and collect historic quilts. She starts doing this in the 1950s, and it had started, she didn't start out as a maker. She started out being interested in printed textiles, and she collected all kinds of printed textiles. And then she got interested in quilts, and then she started making quilts in historic pieced patterns or applique patterns with her historic materials. So this quilt was actually made in the 20th century, but the materials are all from the mid-19th. And when you see it up close, you see all these wonderful little prints that she's sort of built in, and all of this beautiful handwork. She was really very skilled. Florence was a force of nature. She wrote frequently for the magazine Antiques. She traveled around the country giving lectures, and she really caught the attention of Electra Havemeyer-Webb pretty early on. And so Electra went to Florence as she was building her quilt collection, and asked for insights and advice. And for those of you who've seen our collection, you may know we have almost 700 bed covers in that collection, so a huge number. We were the first museum in the United States to really collect quilts like that and display them as sort of works of art. MoMA gets a lot of credit in the 1970s for displaying big Amish quilts, right? But Electra had been doing it for decades before that. And when she installed her early textile galleries, she actually built these pages, which many of you have probably turned in the past, where you could walk in and get right up to a quilt and sort of turn it. She wanted them to be understood as design resources. And her goal in the textile galleries was to have visitors who could come in and just get this sort of panoply of visual designs all just downloaded into their brains. It's sort of a gift. So Florence Peto was really important for Electra's collecting. Recently, I've been in touch with folks at the American Museum in Bath, which was a really interesting institution put together in the middle of the 20th century, a little bit after Shelburne Museum. Electra and Florence and Electra's first curator, Lillian Baker Carlisle, actually advised folks at the American Museum in Bath on their quilt collection. And so our two collections are very similar. There are some almost one-for-one comparisons. Maybe someday I'll get to do a show with them, I don't know. But they're a delight. Any questions? We have all kinds of other items in the collection that are related to sort of the domestic sphere. We have a really great collection of iron stoves. Surprising no one, folks in Vermont were really interested in making these kinds of items. Does anybody know what really drove the stove industry in the state? I don't know, I figure I might get deep pockets of knowledge somewhere. So there's iron, right? There's iron ore all over the place. So this was made by the Green Mountain Iron Company in Brandon. Some of you may have heard of that. We think it was made around 1840 or 50. What else has just happened in Vermont? 1830s, 1840s. What happens in the 1830s that really changes? Right, the railroad. And what does the railroad use for a while? Steam. So you've got steam-powered vehicles. Eventually they go into using coal, but for a long time, the railroad would sort of clear-cut areas of the state. So timber becomes more and more precious, both as fuel and as building material. And in many homes, homes that had used sort of bigger fireplaces before, they find that they need to be more efficient with their fuel. And so smaller and smaller parlor stoves like this one become very popular. These would have sat not in your main sort of cooking area, but in a room like your parlor or a bedroom, or maybe an upper chamber where you needed to heat things. We have one in our house that we keep a bowl of water on all winter. And they really are remarkably efficient. It's shocking to me every winter how much one of these can bring your heating bill down. So that's sort of interesting. And it also speaks to import and export and to all of these new technologies that are really affecting the lives of Vermonters. We have paintings from the collection that are going to be on display in the exhibition. Can I get the lights in the very front cut? Maybe? I realize it's not as saturated as it could be, but, oh, no, 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 no. All right, if that's the best we could do, it's okay. Oh. Let's try it. Let's try it. Nope. Yay! Okay. All right. Is this all right? Yes. Okay. All right. It was too pretty not to be able to see better. So this is a painting called Ecstatic Fruit by Severin Rosen. And I, like, these paintings in person just glow off the wall. We hung this yesterday, and seeing it out of storage in the context of the gallery with the lighting, it just is magical in person. We have quite a collection of American paintings, and this is one, interestingly, Severin Rosen started out his professional career as a painter in Germany. He was painting porcelain. And so he took those skills and transferred them to painting on canvas. And so you really get this idea of detail when you look at his pictures. All these beautiful blackberries and grapes down here that just sort of seem to glow from within. I love these lemons, right, with their sort of twisty rinds that have been peeled off. And when you get up close, you see just a little bit of effervescence in the glass of wine. So these really lovely pictures speak to bounty and wealth and all those kinds of things that in 1852, when this was painted, would have been, the sign that you had made it in an upper middle class home. We have really wonderful paintings like this one. This is by Edward Lamson Henry. This is called Old Clock on the Stairs. And in it, you see all these great details. So this beautiful sort of 1820s, 1830s Philadelphia couch. And in the cabinet, in this corner cabinet that these two people are standing at, there is all of this really... Hang on. Are we over here? Oh, there we go. Okay. There's all this really beautiful Chinese export porcelain that you're seeing too. So just really, really wonderful things that make you want to sort of get up close. One of my favorite things about this painting is that in the window you see all these plants. Philadelphia was a center of a lot of botanical study in the 18th century, and it is in fact it was home to the library where like Lewis and Clark trained before they went west on their expedition. One of the plants in the window here is a geranium, and there was there's a whole story about geraniums coming to Philadelphia during the yellow fever epidemic. Folks realized that there's a story about folks realizing that if you had geraniums in your home, there were fewer people who were dying of yellow fever. And now, if you're a gardener, you know that geraniums are a natural sort of mosquito repellent. And so it's when I look into pictures like these, I really enjoy all of the different sort of detail, but also the sort of larger stories that span from them. Another interior that we have here, this sort of looks like a painting, probably, from where some of you are sitting. So this is our one and only Thorn Room. Has anyone been to the Art Institute of Chicago and seen their collection of these? You have in the back. So can you tell me about Narcissa Thorn? I've got a picture of her here. So Narcissa Thorn created all of these miniatures. They're miniature rooms. If you go to the Art Institute in Chicago, you can see them, and they are incredibly detailed interiors. So here you see her at her work table painting all sorts of parts of her models. So like this is, to give you a sense of scale, about this big, so maybe 2 feet wide. And it has all of this detail on the inside, everything from these chandeliers to this little painting on an easel with a palette, to these tiny, tiny needle-pointed slipcovers on tiny Chippendale chairs. They are just magical. I have another picture of this. This guy. So this tiny little wingback chair, complete with a tiny cocktail set. It's really, I mean, it's really sweet. We were talking a little bit earlier about what exactly it is that I do at the museum. And it amazes me every day that I get to go to work and work with so many different kinds of things. There's never a dull moment. So in addition to our sort of interior lives section, we have a whole section devoted to animals in art called Wildlife. And I will say, I am a dog person, but the cats are really representing in the show. This is Tinkle. She is perhaps the most famous painting at Shelburne Museum. She has been reproduced many times. Every now and then you'll be watching an episode of Law and Order and she'll show up. She also was employed in cat food commercials in the 1990s. She was a pretty fancy cat. So on the back of this painting, there is a date, and we know her name because her name is painted on it. We don't know who commissioned the painting. Presumably Tinkle's loving owner. But she's definitely a fancy cat. We also have this portrait of a cat. So this, right, talk about things that I never thought I'd be working with. So this is known belovedly as Minnie from the Outskirts of Town. I bring this up to you because when she was collected, we didn't know who this cat was, but Mrs. Webb had a kind of pattern where if there wasn't a name for something, she or some of the early members of her staff would often assign it a title. And so poor Minnie, you know, I think she and Tinkle sort of stand off. And one of the things that you'll notice about the subtitle to the show, we titled the exhibition Varied and Alive, New and Rarely Seen Treasures from Storage. We have some new additions to the collection too. So while Minnie and Tinkle have been in the collection for a long time, we have a new portrait of a cat from Warren Kimball that has just come in. So he will also be in the show. We have a cat gravestone. We have some Bennington lions. We have all kinds of things that are really amping up the feline presence. Not as much dog material, I will say. We also, in Wildlife, are featuring a rotation of some of our Audubon folios. This is a really large print of a swan. It was included in Audubon's 1830s Birds of America, which Audubon had hoped that he would be the first person to publish a formal ornithology. He traveled around the country gathering subscriptions for this, so going out to gather the money to fund the project. In the end, he had more than 400 elephant folios or plates. They were printed in London. Audubon would draw the birds, and then he would go to one of two engravers to have them actually cut the plates for these. And then once the plates were pulled or printed as lithographs, they were then hand-colored. And they're really, really beautiful in person. We know less, actually, about the engravers who were creating all of the plant life in the pictures. So one of the things about Audubon's plates is that they include environments where these birds would live. And there were countless engravers who were sort of doing those backgrounds and foregrounds. So really, really interesting things. Ornithology is one of my favorite topics. It was a favorite of early scientists too in North America because there was such a variety of birds that it allowed people to think about big questions of genetics and environments and how do we classify the world around us. Just really, really beautiful things. So, still on this theme, it wouldn't be Vermont if I didn't pull out some dancing bears someplace, I thought. Thanks for that. Anyway, so this is a chowder pot that was made for the Campfire Club of America. The Campfire Club was one of these sort of early 20th century social clubs where you had to be invited to join, right? So there were all kinds of folks like Teddy Roosevelt who were members, but this was a sort of presentation chowder pot, and it has these really incredible decorations all around it. And so these bears who are carrying these sort of pine boughs with them were representative of sort of conviviality and strength, and were meant to kind of remind members of the club of how important it was to sort of get away from your big city job and get back out into nature. So these were all made, this was made in 1911, and if you think about what's happening nationally, right, there are a lot of parts of the country that are industrializing, and people are starting to ask themselves, is this really the way that I want to live? Is this the best way to live? I need to sort of get away to the country for a little while. We have a really wonderful collection of items at the museum. They're bowls by a Swedish-American carver named Gustav Hertzberg. So Hertzberg would go out and find these sort of burls in the woods in Vermont, and he would take advantage of their sort of natural curves, but then carve sort of as the spirit moved him. And so this bowl is just wild. It's called Noah's Ark, and so you can see everything in it from sort of human faces to turtles. And it's carved, so this is the top side of it. This is a picture of Gustav and his family. Really beautiful. I like these photographs. But here you see other kinds of organic forms. We have snakes and birds. And we've even got, let's see, a big frog here. So you can see this guy. The longer you look at these, the more animals sort of pop out at you. And we have 8 that are on exhibition in the show that are just really, really wonderful. So another view of the front, you can see sort of like maybe a monkey here. And then this is the underside of the bowl. So you see this really incredible turtle, maybe a whale or a fish, and then these other animals that just sort of, the longer you look, the more they pop out. Snakes at the top, a snail. So these are really great. We have more textiles in the show too. Our sort of final section is titled Afterlife. And it looks at all the different ways that we as people navigate death and dying, and sort of memorializing the memories of those who we've lost, while they're with us or not. So we have a really wonderful collection of memorial silkwork embroideries. This one is from Vermont, and it's really great in that it's sort of painted and stitched. You'll notice that it's been sort of tacked to this larger board. When this was made, it would have been put into probably a circular frame, or a square frame that had a kind of circular aperture. But For the show's purposes, we're displaying this without a frame so we can sort of talk about the materials and how silk degrades over time and all those kinds of things. We have paintings like this one. So it was a recent acquisition. There was a fairly well-known 19th century painter named John Frederick Peto. And Peto was best known for like picture rack painting. So he would paint trompe-l'oeil or trick of the eye pictures that had letters or newspaper clippings or photographs or, currency sort of peeling out of these pictures off the wall that made you look twice. And this was actually a memorial that John painted for his father, Thomas. It was painted about 9 years after his father passed away and just 4 before John passed away. And so we've included this in our kind of memorial section. If you talk to my colleague Corey Rogers, this is the most extraordinary item in the show. So this is a giant banner that we have along the entire back wall of our gallery. We think that this was made probably in the 1840s. And we call it our Millerite banner. So there was a pastor in the 1820s and 30s named William Miller, and he traveled around New England. You've heard of him maybe, yes? So what do we know about the Millerites? They were looking for the end of the world. They were looking for the end of the world. You're absolutely right. So, I mean, it's really extraordinary. Groups that tend to look for the end of the world and really put a date on it don't tend to do well after that date passes, I would argue. And the Millerites believed that the world was going to end in 1843. They had a specific date. They knew it, and for about a decade prior to that, they traveled around and wanted to sort of convert folks to this way of thinking. There were a lot of things that the Millerites preached that you could practice. So one of them was they were actually involved with a lot of early abolitionist organizations. They believed in equal rights for men and women. They had a lot of, frankly, fairly progressive views for the time. But they did have this sort of one thing, that the world was going to end. And so this banner, when you see it in person, is unrolled on a really big mount that we built for it. But you can see at the very top of it that it was probably nailed to the wall or maybe hung from hooks as it traveled around New England. And so I've got some sort of close-ups of it, of different sections of this. So you can see, it's really incredible. All of this text is painted, and so they had someone with a very, very firm hand, I think. Here we have the beast with the 7 heads from Revelations. And here you can see that on November 13th in 1833, so they involved all kinds of celestial events. So things like comets, movements of the planets and stars, all of these sort of portents that were sort of leading up to the end of the world in 1843 were all sort of set up on this. So it's really something that I think, if you get a chance to visit, is really incredible to see in person. We also, as you all may have heard, it's the 250th coming up. And so we wanted to have a nod with some of our items to sort of revolutionary history. And so here you see George and Martha. You may wonder, why do their faces look so funny? And they may also look sort of familiar to you. So these 2 portraits of George and Martha Washington were painted by a man named William Matthew Pryor, who was an itinerant preacher and painter in New England. He worked quite a bit in Vermont and Maine, and he, believe it or not, was actually also a Millerite. And so there is a sort of funny connection there. But you may know that George Washington, when he passes away in 1799, the whole country goes into mourning, right? And so Prior to his passing, the most famous portrait of him had been painted by a painter named Gilbert Stuart. It's the same likeness that's used on the $1 bill, all those kinds of things. So Stuart painted this, and Stuart's original painting of George, which we refer to as the Athenaeum portrait, was left unfinished. But because it was the last formal sitting that George Washington ever gave while he was alive, it got reproduced a lot. In the 1840s, when we think that William Matthew Pryor made these two pictures, so there are a lot of these. If you go down to an antique mall in southern Vermont, you may see them pop up. Eglomise paintings are reverse paintings on glass. So what we're looking at right now is the front side of a glass surface through which these pictures have been painted. So imagine the painter had to put down the highlights first, right? And then build backward without being able to really see what he was doing. And so they are extraordinary items. These were in really, really good shape. These are a fairly recent donation to the museum, actually. We have one of the largest collections of works by William Matthew Pryor in a public institution, but we didn't have a set of these. And really interestingly about Pryor's work, so he really did most of his labor before the advent of photography. But in the 1830s, photography becomes widely available. And all of a sudden, the people who had been asking him to paint portraits of their families were like, I can take a picture, no problem. And so Pryor had to pivot in his career to figure out what he could sell that people would still buy. And it turned out that pictures of George and Martha Washington were very popular. And so he painted dozens of sets of these that circulated. And because of their delicate nature, not a lot of them have survived sort of intact. So the last two items I want to share with everybody, these are gravestone rubbings that were actually done by a lady named Betty Emery, who passed away in 2016. So Betty was, she lived in Colchester and in Shelburne and in Williston. She was actually the first telephone dispatcher for the Williston Fire Department. And she outlived two husbands. She had all kinds of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But there was a point where she got really interested in early gravestones in New England. And so she would travel around and make grave rubbings of some of the ones that she really liked. And we have a huge collection of them. So we have 5 that are on display in the show. This one was of Jasper Tucker from Randolph. And the final item that I have, so this was from Rockingham, Vermont, of an unidentified subject. But I just really love it. You know, when you live around here, if you take a walk through town or somewhere on your drive, you have the occasion to pass like one of our really incredible cemeteries, right? With all of the wonderful sort of marble sculptures and monuments. Some of my favorites are the slate ones, and that was what Betty really focused on. And when our senior curator and I started going through these, they're all done on sort of onion skin paper, so they're very sort of lightweight. We just fell in love with them, and we thought, well, these haven't been out in a while. We probably should consider doing that.
How did you mount them?
So they're mounted, they're hinged in frames, and so they're hinged and matted. We had our conservator do the hinging, and then we put them in fairly simple black wooden frames. So yeah, we've got 5 of these that'll be up for the duration of the show, and they were just a delight to go through. I think a lot about, many of you have probably heard of the printmaker Sabra Field. For a while, she was going around taking grave rubbings too. Really interesting things. So with that, I'm going to stop, but I do want to let everyone know, and we can, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to flip these lights on. Oh, really bright. Is this everybody okay? Okay. So I thought what I would do, the dates of the exhibition are up here. We're going to open to the general public this year on May 9th. We will close at the end of October for the season, and then we will reopen in May of 2027, and the exhibition will be up through the end of October 27. If you are interested, before we take questions, I wanted to give you guys a couple of interesting dates. So next Thursday, on March 26th at 6 p.m., I'm going to do a close-looking webinar looking at the bed rugs with our associate textile conservator. So that will be online. If you're interested in that, you can check the website and register. They are free and open to anyone, so we would love to have you. The following Thursday, April 2nd at 6, my colleague Corey Rogers is going to be doing another close-looking webinar having to do with this exhibition. So again, you can sign up on the website. On Wednesday, April 15th, I'm going to be doing a needlepoint webinar with Ellen Thompson, who is a representative of the Vermont Sampler Initiative. Has anyone heard of that project? Great. So they have done such an incredible job of trying to catalog every known Vermont-made sampler everywhere in the state. And putting those all together in a database. So for people like me who work on these materials in our collections, this kind of research is really critical. And I'm really excited to get to talk with Ellen about their work and how it really helps to shape research in institutions like Shelburne Museum. And then finally, Saturday, May 9th at 10 a.m., our museum campus will open for the season. So we are open every day from 10 to 5 through the end of October, and we would love to see you. So with that, does anyone have questions? Yes, sir.
You said you have a collection of 700 quilts. Are they all on display?
So the question was, you say you've got a collection of about 700 quilts. Are they all on display? No, they are not all on display. We do annual rotations of that collection. So this year, we have 2 galleries that will be filled with quilts in the Hat and Fragrance Textile Building on the north end of campus. One of the galleries will have a selection of sort of patriotic quilts for the 250th birthday of the country. The other gallery is going to be filled with a collection of log cabin quilts. So who's a quilter here? Anyone? Okay, so you may know this. The log cabin quilt pattern was one of the earliest patterns that sort of gained popularity in the 19th century, and a lot of it had to do with Lincoln. And so we're going to talk a little bit in those spaces about histories of historical figures and how those histories then get translated into the material culture that we live with in our own homes. So that's a great question. Yeah? Yes?
So did you start gathering stuff for this show? I mean, has it been years or?
So the question is, how long have we been gathering items for this exhibition? We have been working on this for about a year and a half. So some of this, usually in the Pizzigalli Center, we have exhibitions that are largely grounded in loan objects from other institutions. Because we are currently in the process of building the Pizzigalli Center for Native American Art, we are really working on sort of focusing on our permanent collection more so that we have a little more sort of bandwidth. Bringing in loans from other institutions is a lot of work. And so for this, we thought, well, isn't this a great opportunity to get out some pieces that we haven't seen in a while? Or that maybe we've never displayed. Some of these bed rugs have never been on display. And they are so delicate that they don't travel very well. The same is true with some of the other items that you'll see in the galleries. So we have it set up. We sort of decided that we wanted it to look a little bit like an attic. So we've got a kind of chock-a-block aesthetic for the installation itself. It's a great question. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
On top of the bed rugs, are they applique or pieces of, I don't understand what the top is.
So you've got to, okay, so the question is, what is the top of a bed rug made like? The closest thing I can liken it to that you might be familiar with is a hooked rug. But a hooked rug is a little different, right? So a hooked rug, there's a burlap ground, and you use a hook, right, to reach down through that burlap and pull up a couple strands of yarn. For a bed rug, all of them are a little bit different. Mary Comstock's rug uses a kind of running stitch, so a needle that goes up and down through that ground material. We have others that might be classified as like shirred rugs, so pile that is pulled up and then cut. We have others that look a lot like hooked rugs, but that don't use that kind of brittle ground. I'm trying to think what else. Some of them have an almost crocheted-like top to them. The 8 that we have in our collection really sort of run the gamut. And so they're really interesting to look at in person. It's a material form that there hasn't been a lot of research done on it because there aren't a lot of them that exist. And so one of the great gifts of this exhibition has been that we've been able to really spend some time looking at them and thinking about them from a material perspective. How were they made? What kinds of materials were used for them? What kinds of wear patterns do they show? So a little more experiential kinds of questions.
They weren't just decorative, they actually slept with them.
Yes, people actually slept with them. We don't have a lot of pictures of people sleeping with them, and that's something that we've been researching.
Photography wasn't invented.
Well, right, photography wasn't a thing, and so we don't have photographs, and they're a fairly regionally specific form. So we see them in New England and like the Canadian Maritimes, but not really any place else. It's not like a European form that comes over. We think that they may be related to the idea of turkey work embroidery that was coming from Europe. Turkey work, in colonial homes, sometimes you would find these sort of imported covers for chairs or covers for tables, right? In an early home, textiles were the single most expensive, or when we look at inventories of homes, it's the textiles in homes that are worth the most. And that's because really, until after the Revolution, all finished textiles here had to be imported, right? If you're a colony, what do you exist to do? You create raw materials that you ship out, and then you're a consumer for finished materials that come back. But until the Revolution, people in North America, in the British colonies, were prohibited from producing finished textiles. And that, when you see sort of revolutionary paintings of women at their looms, it was sort of a revolutionary act in some ways. I could talk about that all day. Anyway, I saw another question though. Yes?
When I retired from the museum, entrance fee was $18.50
Yeah.
for 2 days,
Yes.
and half to go
Mm-hmm.
Is that still true? And what is the entrance fee today?
Okay, so the question is, what is the entrance fee today? And I think, so I believe it is $27 for out-of-staters for 2 days. So the pass is still good for 2 days. It is, I think, $10 for Vermonters, but don't quote me on it. And if you are a member, obviously it is free with your membership. But I think that is about right. It may be 24. I may be wrong on that, but that's a good question. Yes, ma'am.
You also have those great passes that you give to the libraries.
We do.
This is free.
So the comment was there are also, you might check with your local library if you want to come. There are a lot of libraries that have passes to the museum. Yeah, it's terrific. And I really, I'm really glad that that's something that exists. So definitely check your local library. Where I live in Middlebury, we have the beauty of 2 libraries. And I have to tell you guys, the East Middlebury Library is the cutest place to go on a rainy Sunday. No complaints. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to make a comment that Hampton, New York is William Miller Chapel. It's on Hill.
Oh,
And a cemetery.
oh. Wait, are you, is that tea? I was hearing a whistling. Okay, sorry. I was like, I wanted to make sure it wasn't me. So I don't know. So the comment was that there is a Lillian Miller Cemetery in Hampton. Is that right? I'm sorry. Chapel. So I don't know if that is a connection or not. Is it? Wow, so I didn't know that. How many of you all know the name Lillian Baker Carlisle? Okay, she's a legend. Her daughter Diana is still around, and yeah, as a curator at Shelburne, I owe a great debt of gratitude to Lillian. Anybody else? Yes.
My husband's father made all his own wine, and after he passed, the family gave everything to the museum.
Oh.
What do they do with the things that they never show?
So the question is, what does the museum do with the things that we never show? That is a great question. So we have buildings all across the campus that are filled to the brim with collections. A favorite of folks that has sort of semi-recently gone offline is Shaker Shed, which is where our tool collection is. And that's one of those spaces that, like, if I had my druthers, I'd really like to work on that space. The short answer to your question is we have a database. It's not publicly accessible, but you can email us or call us, and we can tell you exactly where your items are. We are not the biggest staff. I mean, we're the largest museum in the state of Vermont. But you'd be surprised at how long things take when you try to do them the right way. So all of that is to say, our exhibitions are wide-ranging. Our collections are too. But I could be there for 5 or 6 lifetimes and probably never see every item in the collection. So it's a good question. Yes, ma'am.
I love the Pizzigalli Center. I think it's wonderful that before that was built, you had for a brief time the 1950s house, which was so much fun to visit. Is there any indication you might do anything like that again?
So the question, it was a comment and a question about how we used to have the 1950s house at the museum, and when the Pizzigalli Center was built, that building was taken offline and destroyed for this new building. The question is there any indication that we're gonna have another 1950s house? I don't know, maybe. Right? It has been a long time since we have added a building like that. But one of the interesting things about our collection, so speaking of Lillian Baker Carlisle, when she was serving as this sort of early curator with Mrs. Webb, there was a quilt maker who came to us with this really beautiful embroidered quilt. It had all the seasons and all the months of the year and all the holidays just stitched in this incredible, incredible tour de force of work. And it had been made in 1952. And she brought it to the museum and said, I'd really like to donate this to the collection. And Electra at first declined and said, you know, it's too modern, it's too new. And Lillian looked at her and said, you know, Mrs. Webb, I think you should really reconsider. Someday, this too will be old. Right? So when we collect and when we think about our spaces, we think about their salience now, but we also try to think forward. One of the items I would love to get for the museum is like a Vermont rocker, you know, the ones with all the wooden sort of carved. I think they're terrific. They're very comfortable to sit in. We do have this really incredible collection now of historic Vermont furniture, but I think there are more contemporary things too that would fit really well with those stories. And our whole curatorial staff sort of shares that inclination. One of the big things we've been collecting for the last decade or so has been to strengthen our collection of American paintings relative to 20th century Vermont painters. Many of the artists who were working at the Southern Vermont Art Center or with the Vermont Artists Guild, we've been investing in pictures by them, getting them cleaned up and ready for exhibition, and yeah, we're starting to get a critical mass of those too. So the collecting does continue. We prune the collection every now and then, but yeah. So I think I have time for one more question. Nobody? Oh, yes, ma'am.
I have a family blanket that was made by an itinerary loom person. So in other words, they went from town to town.
Yeah.
Have you heard of those? Is there one of those displayed?
So the question is, do we have looms that might have been used by itinerant weavers across the region? Yes. We have a whole weaving shed that actually has some incredible looms in it. We have a jacquard loom that was the first loom used by the Scala Silk Company in the United States. We have all kinds of smaller, more personally sized looms. And our textile conservator, Awen Riley Bird, is a weaver. So we've been talking a lot about how to activate those spaces in our galleries. So stay tuned on that. I've done a deep dive into silk lately, so we'll see. That's a great question. I think that's all the time that we have. Thank you all for bearing with me and our technology. For coming.